Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today, of course, is Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul.
And also James Eng. Hey, James, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Paul.
In the podcast today, we have a friend of the family, so to speak. In fact, he has done a podcast with us in the past, but I thought we'd want to bring him back again because it was so important last time when you buy a property, what your inspector thinks about your property. And in the podcast today, we have Bryan Amos, and Bryan is an engineer / multifamily inspector. And so for some people who are thinking about buying properties, the physical due diligence is critical. Physical due diligence is the overseeing of the property, making sure the electrical systems work, the plumbing works, the roof works, the parking lot works, and then also take a look at some of the fixtures in the property, whether it's the appliances in the property. So Bryan is going to kind of give us a little bit more of an in-depth discussion from what it was last year. So we're pleased to have Bryan back in the podcast. I'm going to kick this off to James and kind of talk a little bit about what's going on.
Hey, Bryan, thanks for coming on. In today's market, a lot of buyers are having to go, hard day one with a lot of money. And so we really want to bring you in to really talk about the key components that, maybe the top 10 things that they should be looking at when they're doing their 30 to 45 minute tour of the property. So we recently had you at just like a smaller lunch for some investors, and everyone loved it, and everyone wanted a copy. So we brought you on today, and let's kick it off here. So let's start off at the top of the building.
Hey, James, and Paul and Mike, thanks for having me here again. Just glad to be able to talk with you guys a little bit more about multifamily due diligence. One of the things that I get asked most often is, hey, how much does this cost? What are we looking at? Give me a ballpark. So when I do a preliminary walkthrough with an investor looking at a property, I'm looking at at least these 10 things that are very important that can make or break your deal. And when I'm looking at a property, if on your behalf, I have to charge for that. It's about $750 to $1,000, but this is something that you can do. You can look at and start to learn what important things you should be when you do your preliminary walkthrough with your team. One of the things that I would suggest is don't go by yourself. Go with someone else, someone like myself or with Old Capital, so that they can be talking, asking questions from the manager. You're interviewing the property, basically. You're trying to see if, the profile that you saw on LoopNet really is the real property that you see when you're walking the property.
So let's kind of define what that means. I think when people take a look at a property on LoopNet, they look through kind of sometimes beer goggles yeah. at some of these properties, and the way that the broker or the owner has taken a picture of the property looks like the Taj Mahal. And then when you go to the property, sometimes it looks like when you're 55 years old and you're going on to Match.com. Sometimes that perfect possible mate doesn't look as good as the picture was that you saw on Match.com when you're looking at her or him in the bar. So let's step back. At what period of time should we get you involved again, Bryan? Because that's an important piece.
For this discussion, it's when you've looked at the property online and you're doing your first or second property visit.
Okay.
You're not under contract. You're just trying to get a ballpark idea of how much any renovation or improvements are going to cost. So these are the just rule of thumb as we go through these items. And I encourage you, get a pen and paper, write these down, maybe listen to this podcast again, because we're going to throw a lot of numbers at you pretty quickly on just how to come up with a total price to start running your numbers to see if you want to make an offer on this deal.
Okay, let's keep going.
All right. So one of the first things that we look at when we show up at a property is, of course, the roof. Roof's very important. And these C and B class properties, they're either going to have a flat roof or a pitched roof. Now, flat, of course, obvious. It's generally an older property, and you're going to have tar and gravel, TPO, or modified bitumen. So the type doesn't matter as much, except you want to know the overall size, and that's something you can ask the property manager, how many rentable square feet it is, and you can divide that by 2 when it's a flat roof as a quick rule of thumb of how large a property is.
Let me ask, what is TPO and what is modified bitumen? What does that mean?
Well, TPO is a single ply polymer that it's more reflective. It's a newer roof, and it's good for an overlay on some of these older roofs. Modified bitumen, it's also another flat roof that is good for long-term wear. It's still used today. It's very common. Even it's an older style roof that will last 20 to 30 years if properly taken care of. So the rule of thumb is you're looking for how many squares a size of roof is. So a square is a 10 by 10 section of roof, 10 feet by 10 feet. So that's what roofers use as a guideline to know what's their price per square. And on a flat roof, you're looking at, if you know the roof needs some work, see, you're not going up on the roof on this property tour. You're asking questions. So you're asking, how old is the roof? Does it need repair? Has any roof leaks? So you're looking when you're touring inside the units, do you see any water damage in the units up on the ceiling? So as a rule of thumb, if you think the roof needs to be replaced, an overlay is going to cost you about $400 a square. Now, I know in some areas of the country that may be a little bit high or low, but in general, just to give you a basic price, $400 per square. Now, if you think it needs to be removed completely, so that's an overlay.
Let me ask you a dumb question. What's a square?
A square is a 10 feet by 10 feet.
100 square foot.
100 square foot section of roof.
Okay.
And that's the measurement that the roofer will use to get his pricing. His labor and material costs are all based on the number of squares. So if you have to completely replace a roof, like tear everything off and put a new roof back on, it's going to be $600 a square. So that adds up fairly quickly. So you want to know, again, the total square footage. If you have the rentable square feet that you can get off LoopNet or off the.
Just look on the rent roll, and if it's a 2-story building, you divide it by 2, take half of it times your price per square, right?
And then divide that by 10, so you get your 10 by 10 unit for squares. So the other type of roof is pitched. It's more common on newer properties. It's more preferable for a long-term hold of a property. And in general, you have asphalt shingles on a roof. 3-tab or laminated are fairly common. And to replace a roof for a pitched roof is going to be around $200 a square as a general rule of thumb. And now you can go online and you can, again, you get the rentable square footage. You divide that by 2 if it's a 2-story building, and you can get the overall size of the property. Now, for a pitched roof, a common slope to the roof is going to be 512. That's 5 over 12. And you can, go on Google, get some calculators, and figure that out. But really what you're doing is collecting information for a roofer. So don't practice the, unauthorized practice of roofing. You're collecting this information. You work with a contractor. You're getting this information as you're doing your preliminary walkthrough and handing that off to them. So I work with, roofers and contractors hand in hand right after I'm looking at my property.
Bryan, maybe talk about when someone's looking at a property, some things to look for in terms of when they're looking at the roof, trying to figure out if it's going to need replacement or if it's just I've been on properties with you and you've seen stuff that it looks bad, but in reality, it's not that bad. So maybe there's a couple of those.
So
things.
On a flat roof, assume you're not getting up on the roof, is you're looking at the metal edge around the perimeter, whether it's new metal or if it looks like it's been painted 20 times or if it's rusted. That's an indication that the roof is older. And if they say it's brand new, you've got to question that farther. Also, on a pitched roof, you're looking at asphalt shingles, and you're looking for wind damage. You can't tell hail damage from the ground generally. If you can see defects from the ground, it's generally worse once you get up on the roof. So sometimes people will see discoloration, maybe some moss stains, or when the roof is stained, you'll see some stain marks, and that generally doesn't cause a physical defect to the roof. And so those are okay. But as a general rule, if it looks bad on the ground, you need to check it closer with a roofer.
All right, let's move to the second thing here on your list here. Let's talk about foundation.
So foundation, you're going to have two different kinds, pier and beam or slab foundation. So it's easier to look at a slab when you're walking around the exterior of the property. You're looking for cracks in the brick. You're looking for any separation around windows. The freeze boards, the fascia that goes around the perimeter of the roof to look to see if any boards are kicked out from any movement. And you're also, when you're walking interiors of the property, looking at units, you're looking for cracks around doors and around windows. So if you think there's an issue with foundation, you generally, as a rule, you're going to have to put in piers every 4 feet for a slab foundation. And those are going to cost about $400 per pier. So every 4 feet, $400 per pier, that adds up fairly quickly. And again, Google's your friend. Look at the satellite view. You can actually measure on Google the length of each building, and to get an estimate ballpark of, okay, divide the circumference of the building by 4, and you'll know how many piers if you need to pier that whole building. So on pier and beam, really, you take that note down that it's pier and beam. If you see some distress, you really need to get someone to crawl under that building. So that's your next step, if you do proceed with a purchase.
So what are some of the differences? So slabs, just poured concrete on the ground, and pier and beam, or beams with like subfloors on top of it and level floors of the units.
Exactly. There's going to be a crawl space on pier and beam, and you're going to have your piers, which are your footings in the ground, and your beam, either most likely wood, will go across, connecting those
the telltale signs are just sagging subfloors. What are some of the things that
exactly
people see?
For pier and beam, when you're in a unit, that's when you can tell the corners of walls are sagging. Walking through the middle of a unit,
the sponginess of the floors themselves. We see that all the time on these older properties. Yes. And it also could be a telltale sign of water damage.
So if you see that when you're doing a property tour, further investigation is going to be needed. Mm-hmm. So one thing to put on your checklist once you go farther. The next thing is sewer line. So there's a couple of typical types of sewer line: clay tile, cast iron, or PVC. So clay tile is the oldest type of sewer line, and generally older than 1950. That's what they used to use, which is not a bad type of sewer line, except it is more susceptible to root penetration and separations. And the next one is cast iron. From the 60s and 70s, you have a lot of cast iron pipe, and those can rust. And over time, you'll start to have a gutter or channel in the pipe that can rust out the bottom. And then the newest will be PVC, and that's what you have on most properties today. Probably the early to mid 80s is when they started using that, and on newer properties you're going to see that. When you're walking a property, you're not going to have access to a camera and look at these, like you would in due diligence. When you pay for a plumber to come out there and really inspect those lines, what you're looking for, do you see any what they call cleanouts, any points of access around the building that you can service that building? So on a newer property, you're looking for a white sewer line cap. You're looking for that. And for older properties, cast iron, you're going to look for that. Clay tile, you don't have any cleanouts.
On the cleanouts, sometimes it's the white liquid paper that's around
right.
The cleanouts is an indication that there's been a backup.
Exactly.
On the property.
A lot of times we come on a property, we ask if hey, are there any sewer line issues, any backups? And they say, oh, no, it's fine. And you're doing your property tour, and you see those areas where they've had to put down lye, something, to clean up.
To kill the smell.
Right, that too. And you see evidence of a recent backup. That triggers you to know, hey, I might need some extra work here. And what I do is pencil in $500 per building to do a what they call scrape and clean or hydrojet. We run a sewer machine and your hydrojet to clean those lines out. So a lot of grease buildup. So that gives you at least a number to put in your budget that you can work with from there. Next is I look at domestic hot water. And there's two types of hot water systems in these properties. You either have individual hot water heaters or you'll have a boiler system. So when you're touring the property and you're going in units, be sure you open that closet and look for the hot water heater if you're an individual hot water heater system. So take a look and see if it's old and rusted. You look at the bottom of the water heater and you look at the top. You see where the TMP line is coming out, which is a temperature and pressure relief valve. And so what I'm looking at is whether it's properly installed, and you may not be able to check that, whether it's properly installed or not, but you can see whether it looks like it's 50 years old.
Yeah, is it running uphill or downhill, right? So
Right.
it should be going downhill. That's usually one of the common problems.
Exactly. So usually when a water heater is replaced, the maintenance guy did it, and he doesn't know how to properly install a water heater. That's pretty common. And when you have an individual hot water heater's property, I budget $500 to replace that hot water heater. Now, if you go to Home Depot, it's about $330 to get a hot water heater, but you have to have someone install that. And so that could be your maintenance guy, which is a little bit less, but if you hire a plumber, it's going to be more than that. So I pencil in $500 per water heater when I'm running my estimates. The other type of system is a boiler system, and you either have one or two or three, depending on the size of your property, central boilers that will provide hot water for the property. If you go into those are generally located in the mechanical room, and you're looking for really how clean is the mechanical room. You're just doing a surface view here. You're looking at how organized the property is. Is the ceiling falling in? Because sometimes these mechanical rooms are like the last thing that the maintenance guy ever gets to. And so they're unkempt. That's where they put their storage. There's some, water damage from old roof leaks because it's not a priority to take care of it. You're looking at all those exterior side things to see how well they're running the property too. So if you look at a boiler and it looks like it's on its last leg, pencil in $25,000 to $30,000 to replace a boiler and a storage tank. So,
And what size is that?
for like a 70-unit property, you can supply enough hot water with one boiler and storage tank for that.
Before you move on,
Yeah,
the individual water heaters, if you notice that they're how old before they need to be replaced? Are similar to homes that so many years go by?
Exactly. So when you install a new individual hot water heater, you're going to get a 6-year warranty that generally lasts 11 to 12 years if you're an electric water heater. So anytime after that, you look at the serial number, you'll see the manufacturer date, and you're counting. When you're in full due diligence, you can actually go through and get the serial number of every water heater, and you can see the age of each and map that out when you might need to kind of budget to replace those over time.
And what about the life on boilers?
Boilers generally last 20 to 30 years. So it may look bad, but then you may be surprised in full due diligence when you get a master plumber or someone look at it that it's actually in good shape. So because a boiler can be repaired and refurbished a few times over its life and still provide good service to your property. So the next thing we're looking at is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And you're looking at either individual systems again on newer properties, or on older properties, you have what they call chiller systems. So on older properties, generally they have 2-pipe chiller systems in many cases, where you have an outside chiller that's either water cooled or air cooled, and you have an inside component in the mechanical room, which would be a hydronic boiler. And both of these either heat or cool water that is piped throughout the property, and that either hot water or cold water is blown over evaporator coils and to provide heating or cooling for the individual unit.
Can they be done at the same time?
No, they can't. So what you have is it's either all on or all off, for heating or cooling. And so they have actually city required dates when you need to turn on the chiller system for cooling during the summer and then switch over to heating in the winter. Sometimes, in our Texas weather, it could be cold one day, hot one day, and you cannot change that very quickly. So that's why on newer properties, individual ACs are preferred. And when you're looking at individual systems come in two components. It's called a split system. You'll have a condenser on the outside of the unit, and you'll have an air handler on the inside of a unit. So when you're doing a property tour, you generally have access on the outside. You're not pulling down the access hatch for the air handler. So you're looking at the age of a condenser. And so when I'm walking a property, I'm counting how many really old, air conditioner units I'm looking at. And when I budget to replace a condenser, I'm penciling in $2,000 to replace that condenser. Again, components can be cheaper, but when I'm installing it or if I'm getting a contractor to do it, it's going to be a little bit higher. So I pencil in $2,000 per condenser. On the air handler, you really need to inspect every one of them. But again, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 on an air handler as well. But to come up with a rough budget, I'm walking the property, I'm counting how many old condensers I see and kind of extrapolating, it's a 200 unit property, retour, and I see, 10, 15 really old condensers. I'm probably multiplying that by 2 because I didn't see the whole property to get me a rough estimate on HVAC.
And what about the cost and life on the chiller?
The chiller will also, if well maintained, can last 20 to 30 years. But to replace it, say you have a 1970 property, you've come up on the end of the useful life for the chiller. Chiller generally costs $1,000 per ton. So we're going to have a 100-ton unit is going to generally cost about $100,000. Okay. 50-ton unit is going to cost about $50,000 roughly. Except if you have a property in between those two, you don't really have access to those incremental sizes. You either have a 50-ton or 100-ton. There's only a limited supply of what kind you can actually get. So you go up to the next highest available size. On HVAC, the individual systems, the condensers last 20 years and the air handlers can last 30 to 40 years because they're in a protected environment most of the times.
Okay, good. Electrical?
When you're touring a property, you don't have access to pull off panels or maybe, see if it's aluminum or copper. So you're asking the manager. So throughout all of this, your manager's your friend. The maintenance guy, as you're touring the property, be sure to talk to them and invite them to just provide information that would help you on putting together your preliminary budget.
What were kind of the general years aluminum only was out for a certain period of time? What's the general age of a property that might be highly likely to have potential?
Generally
aluminum?
to the mid-60s to the mid-70s is where you'll see aluminum wiring. And to know that's something you need to look for.
So if you're looking at anything in the 80s, the chance of aluminum wiring is 0 for the most part, right?
Yeah. Right. So, lenders, insurance companies prefer copper. What you can do when you're walking a property is you're looking for GFCI plugs, which is ground fault circuit interrupt, to be exact. It used to be called GFIs, what you also hear pretty commonly. And you're looking for those in the wet areas, in kitchens and bathrooms. You're making sure that they have those plugs installed because that's per city code. So when you take over a property, the city has another chance to go through their checklist of things that they want you to update on the property, and that's usually on that list. A GFCI, the actual device costs $14-15, but to get it installed from a licensed electrician is probably another $15. So we budget $30 per device, and as a rule, just as overall on a property, 2.5 GFCIs per unit.
Okay. And then what about the panels?
If you hear that, one of the panels that's not preferred by insurance companies is a Federal Pacific Electric panel. And if you think that that might need to be replaced required by the lender or the insurance company, those are $500 to $750 per panel, depending on your quantity. So if you're changing out a 100-unit property, generally you can get that down to $500.
Okay. And then anything else on the exterior while we're walking around the property that we should be looking for?
So as you're touring the property, you're looking for any deferred maintenance, any siding that's peeling off, carpentry that needs to be replaced, stair treads, metal railings, a lot of different things to look for. And if on a smaller property or a property that's fairly clean, even if it's a larger property, I still pencil in $25K for exterior repairs. Because even a property that's been updated, most people may not be able to see, some deferred maintenance on a rotted wood that's been painted, but in a year or two, that's going to show up. So even on a property that's fairly clean, you're going to have some exterior work to do. Now, these C and B class properties, every 3 to 5 years, it's going to need, updating. And so I pencil in $25K, like I said. On a larger property that's maybe a little more distressed, I pencil in $50K for my exterior repairs, just as a ballpark. Now, if I know there's a lot of deferred maintenance and we're going to come in and have to do a lot of full paint, I pencil in $75K. Again, that could be higher or lower, but I'm talking, I'm not seeing all the property. I'm not walking every building, but just as a rule of thumb, at least I have something in my budget there to work with. Another thing on painting, if you are looking to repaint the property, I estimate $450 per unit as a price to paint that property. That's $450 per unit to do a full paint. And that's your starting point. Maybe you can be a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on some details of the property. But most contractors that I work with, that's one of their rules of thumb that we use.
I mean, we were just at Mike's property a couple of days ago, and a lot of these 60s, 70s, 80s properties, they're, ripping off a lot of the wood and putting hardy. Do you have a rough sort of price on that so people can gauge?
Right. That one, you really need measurements to do the hardy accurately. You have pieces, $7, $8 per linear foot. And so I recommend that you get a contractor to really measure that.
Yeah, what kind of rule of thumb we use is about $700 to $800 a unit if you got to completely rehardy it plus the paint. So you're $1,100 give or take, $1,200 to paint and hardy a typical building. On obviously every building's different depending on how much brick they have versus the wood you're ripping off. And if you want to go back with cedar trim or hardy trim, there's some details on that as well. But yeah, $1,100 to $1,200 if you would need a hardy and paint an entire building is kind of the ballpark that we start at. So cool. And then kind of moving to parking lots. So one of the things I try not to buy anymore are asphalt parking lots if I can. Right. So maybe we can talk about the difference between asphalt and concrete and why concrete is preferred.
Well, on your newer properties, they're going to have a concrete parking lot. They're going to last 30, 40 years or longer if it's properly installed. And an asphalt parking lot, you're going to have constant maintenance, more upkeep. You're going to need to keep it seal coated, which is the resurfacing.
Black, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like, to keep it protected, that underlayer protected. So on an asphalt parking lot, to do replacement, it's going to be $5 per square foot. And for a concrete parking lot, even though it lasts longer, but it does cost more to repair when it comes time. And that's generally $10 a square foot to repair. So one of the things about parking lots is that you really can't increase your rent because you've improved your parking lot. So it's something to, satisfy your lender, satisfy the city requirements, but it's hard to recoup that money. So we try to do exactly what the city's required, but not overdo on these properties.
How long does the typical resurface of an asphalt last? How much useful life do you typically get out of that?
It depends on your traffic, but a year and a half to 2 years is you're looking to reseal coat that
stripe,
parking lot.
And then if I have a 100-unit property on average, what would it take to seal coat and stripe a parking lot?
Depends on your square footage again,
because
some 100-unit properties have a lot of parking and some are a little bit smaller. We're looking at some minor repairs, some seal coating, striping is about 10 to 15K is what I'm looking at.
So every 2 to 3 years, you're spending 15K in a parking lot.
Right, which is why you're moving to concrete.
Right, yeah. It's much superior to a recurring expense that happens all the time. Okay, maybe kind of moving on. Another thing on your list, you have termites.
Well, termites are not something that's going to make or break your deal, but especially here in North Texas, 50% of the properties, especially the older properties, have some kind of termite activity. So you may not see these active termite tubes as you're doing your property tour, but I pencil in 2 to 4K. If you do a large property, 4K, that's $4,000 for termite spot treatment and a warranty. And if it's smaller, maybe 2K for that. Something that the lender is going to require that you're going to have to put in your budget anyway. So just might as well throw that in because it's pretty common here in North Texas.
Okay, then kind of moving forward, the next category you have is the interior repairs. Kind of the final category is interior repairs. What are some things that you look at when you walk in these units? Because when we buy properties, we hire you to walk all our units for us. So what is that you and your team look at when you're going through these interiors?
When we go through an interior, we'll have a checklist that we have on an iPad so they can go quickly and efficiently and not bother the residents too much. So we, depending on the property, 85 to 90 points that we're checking as we're walking through. It takes 4 to 5 minutes for each unit. And we're looking at the flooring, appliances, and in the bathrooms, the big ticket items really are the cost drivers here. So I'm looking whether the flooring is vinyl tile or sheet vinyl or vinyl plank, as many are going to nowadays, or is the vinyl plank. I'm looking to upgrade appliances where needed or replace, depending on what the investor end goal is.
Sure.
So if you're looking to upgrade a unit and you're touching every surface, you're doing the flooring, the appliances, resurfacing the countertops, generally on these C-class properties. B-class, maybe you'll put in new laminate countertops. On the low end, you're going to be at least $3,500 per unit. Now, that's if you're very efficient. I get these numbers from large REITs.
Sure.
And how how much they're hoping to, invest into the units to get a return on that money. If you do a large quantity, it's going to be about $3,500. But if you have smaller, you're doing 10 to 15 units, it's going to be a little bit higher. Or if you're doing a higher upgrade, is all the way up to $5,500 per unit on an upgrade.
Yeah, and so a lot of that is really depending on the square footage average of the property. So the larger the unit size, more flooring, more paint, more bathrooms, more respray they have to do. So it's kind of generally a little bit bigger. I think our typical upgrade that we have is somewhere between $4,000 to $4,500. Probably call it $4,500 on average is what we typically spend for flooring, appliances like fixtures, plumbing fixtures, backsplash, and to spray the counters in the bathtub. That's pretty typical for what we spend.
And so that's useful to the new investor who's looking to hire a contractor, and they may get bid $7,000-8,000. So know that that's not really the industry standard. You need to pull them in. Don't use your residential contractor to do apartments because they're always going to be higher. So look to use someone who's in the business doing it every day, and they can streamline those costs.
It's usually most of the stuff is handled by the management company. Sometimes they need to outsource. Typically, you outsource flooring to a flooring vendor, and sheet vinyl is usually somewhere around $1.20, $1.25 a square foot for sheet vinyl. Carpet's usually 80 to 85 cents a square foot for carpet. And to do a kitchen's, $7,500 to spray the counters and a couple $100 to do a bathtub, I think, right? Something like that. So that's kind of general rules of thumb, and all that adds up to be about $4,500 to do a pretty basic upgrade. Start doing cabinet fronts or cabinets or granite countertops. You kind of go up from there.
And so that's my top 10 list. When we go through it, put these together, you start to get a better picture of what it's really going to cost to rehab or upgrade this property. And one of the things that I like to do that I stole from you, Paul, and so when I'm on the property, I don't give you any credit, but since I'm on your show, I think it's only fair to give you some credit. I asked the manager, it looks like you're doing a great job managing the property, but if you had another $100,000, where would you invest this into the property? What do you think? And you wait for the answer, and they're usually very helpful on, they don't want to highlight problem areas because they're there on behalf of the property. But if they had extra money, where would they put it? And I think that's a great question to ask when you're finishing up your tour.
No, I think so too. Is that it's kind of a dislodging any tension that goes between you as the buyer and them as the agent, either represents the seller or the person is the part of the management company, and just asking them, where do you stick an extra $100,000 in the property? And I think you will uncover problems sometimes by them telling you the answer.
Right.
Well, cool. So, yeah, this is just all pretty helpful. When we're out looking at properties, I look at all these things as well. You bottoming out in the parking lot when you're driving through, you get some issues. One of the things that was a tip that Bryan taught me years ago is when he's driving around and walking around the building, so kind of the bushes and the shrubs, and especially if you're buying something kind of in the early 80s, is kind of that crossover time where you had either cast iron sewers or the newer PVC. So just look for the white clean out caps or the old metal clean out caps. That's usually a telltale sign on which you have on your property, and the PVC is much preferred versus old cast iron, which you have a lot more frequent backups and things like that. So all this I think is very helpful. Paul, what else we got going on?
Well, just following up on that, people wanted to get in contact with you, Bryan. What's the best way to get in contact with you? I mean, you work in the DFW market. Are you available to go out to some other markets? Kind of give us a little bit how people can work with you.
Right. So DFW keeps me pretty busy. It's one of the best areas in the country currently. I do some work in Austin, San Antonio, and some in Houston, depending on the size. I also do some consulting where I maybe not go to the property, but I'm able to handle some questions over the phone.
Bryan's kind of your eyes and ears for making sure that the work has been done correctly. You kind of do some overview of the general contractor. You do some general contracting stuff yourself, but you're out inspecting properties, giving advice, kind of having people listen to you. And you are an invaluable asset, not only to our team in the DFW area, but also Austin, San Antonio, other areas of market that you go into. So I know a lot of people are very pleased with your work, and we're very appreciative of that. So continue to do. But again, if they want to get in contact with you, Bryan, what's the best way?
You can call my office number at 214-755-5921. Again, that's 214-755-5921. Or you can reach me at Bryan Amos. That's BryanAmos at theomnigroup.com. That's THEOMNI group, GROUP.com.
Great information. Thanks, Bryan. What was the feedback, James, from that lunch and learn?
I mean, we had 35 people there, and they were all very appreciative. I mean, just took the education of the group up significantly and gave them confidence to really go out and really talk with listing brokers and sound like they know what they're talking about. So, I mean, it just made a huge difference to a lot of people there.
And then what's going on in the Old Capital group? What's new?
I think the next event we have set up is October 5th, is a Thursday. Will be our conference. We'll have, probably over 300 people there here in Dallas, Fort Worth, so at the Addison Conference Center. So you can sign up for that at oldcapitalpodcast.com.
Yeah. And if I can
hear a rumor that the price is going to be going up here pretty soon for the conference, James?
Yeah, so the price comes up here in the summer. It's close to $200, and then if you don't register by the end of the summer, it'll go up about 1 month before the conference. It'll go up another $50.
I think that's the conference to be at, because in the conference we're going to focus on B and C multifamily properties. There's a lot of conferences. The only thing they focus on is A, institutional stuff. And again, I have no idea how the finances and how those properties pencil out. I have no idea how people make money on institutional transactions. But really the B and C space is where people make money at. And we're going to kind of only focus on that space. And so we encourage you to try to make that conference and go into the oldcapitalpodcast.com website and take a look at that and sign up for that. Anything else going on?
As always, we certainly appreciate ratings and reviews on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the other podcast aggregators. And then if you at oldcapitalpodcast.com, You can find the multifamily financing 101 white paper, kind of the blocking and tackling of apartment financing, as well as a sample due diligence checklist, the things that we ask for when we're looking to put an LOI in a contract. So kind of all the diligence information that we typically request when we're buying a property.
Fantastic. Bryan Amos, boy, we do appreciate your top 10 things for people to look at before they go under contract, just kind of back in the napkin of what the actual cost could be. And some great information today. James Eng, thanks for hanging with us. And Michael Becker, great always again. I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.